In the near future, vast sinkholes begin to appear across the globe, triggering devastating explosions that plunge society into chaos. Enormous creatures, dubbed reapers, emerge from these chasms, hunting humans mercilessly. Conventional weapons prove utterly ineffective, leaving billions dead in their wake. Eventually, reports surface from high-altitude regions revealing that the reapers freeze at 8,000 feet, prompting survivors to relocate to elevated areas in search of refuge. 3 years later, in Colorado, a young man named Hunter resides within a small community in the Rocky Mountains. One day, driven by curiosity, he ventures beyond the 8,000-foot safety boundary to see what lies on the other side. Hunter barely takes a few steps before encountering a reaper. Terrified, he sprints back towards safety, narrowly crossing the line before the creature can seize him. Shaken but alive, he returns to the Lost Gulch refuge, where 193 survivors have taken shelter. His father, Will, reprimands him for risking his life and reminds him of both the lurking danger and his own respiratory condition. Hunter defends his actions, explaining his desire to search for others. Will, however, insists he cannot bear to lose his son after already losing his wife. Later, Will discusses the incident with Katie during a hunting trip. While Katie sympathizes with Will's fears, she also notes that Hunter, being the community's only child, naturally longs for companionship. Will reveals that Hunter is drawn to the spot where he last saw his mother. Meanwhile, Nina, a scientist in the group, experiments with bullets, testing their effectiveness on Reaper scales. Her attempts fail, leaving her frustrated. That night, Will hears her persistent gunfire and recalls the time his wife joined Nina on a mission from which she never returned. Suddenly, Will hears Hunter coughing and rushes to replace the filter on the machine, aiding his breathing. Once Hunter is calm and asleep again, Will realizes the filter was the last one in their possession. He studies maps, contemplating the perilous journey beyond the safety line to acquire more filters. On Hunter's birthday, Will uses the community's last box of macaroni and cheese to give his son a special treat. While preparing the meal, Hunter questions why they no longer use the radio. Will explains they must conserve electricity and communicate with other refuges via flags instead. Hunter finds this disheartening, expressing how important human connection is. That night, when Hunter's condition worsens, Will administers an injection. Once Hunter is settled, Will approaches Nina, declaring his plan to leave for Boulder to find filters. Despite claiming he has found a safe route, Nina doubts him, knowing the area's dangers well, as her former laboratory is located there. Will urges Nina to accompany him, given her expertise on Reapers and her survival of a previous mission. However, Nina hesitates, reminding him that his wife perished on that journey. Undeterred, Will suggests traveling through a mine to avoid the creatures, but Nina argues this could trap them instead. After Will departs, Nina works on modifying a compass but becomes emotional, haunted by guilt over the fate of Will's wife. Meanwhile, Will enlists a neighbor to watch over Hunter before heading to a local cache to gather weapons. Katie arrives, determined to join him despite his objections. Reluctantly, Will agrees, and Nina eventually decides to accompany them as well, albeit skeptical of Katie's lack of experience. Before departing, Will promises Hunter he will return, though the boy somberly recalls his mother making the same vow. The trio sets off, with Nina explaining that Reapers emit high bioelectromagnetic pulses, which her modified compass can detect within half a mile. Their journey leads them to the Elba Fire Road and the edge of the 8,000-foot line. After confirming no monsters are nearby, they descend cautiously. Along the way, they discover abandoned vehicles, scavenging supplies such as flares, ammunition, and a grenade launcher, which Katie surprisingly knows how to use. Nina collects a Reaper scale for research, prompting a heated argument with Katie. Tensions rise as Katie accuses Nina of being responsible for her best friend's death, Will's wife. Will intervenes before the dispute escalates, and the group resumes their trek. In the forest, they are startled to encounter wild horses, suggesting that Reapers exclusively target humans. Eventually, they reach the Alta Vista ski area, intending to use the chairlift for a safer route to the mines. Suddenly, Nina's compass signals a nearby Reaper. They spot the trees shaking, heralding its approach. Will scrambles up the lift tower to activate the backup generators, while Katie and Nina remain on the ground to cover him. Panicking, Katie fires grenades, but they fail to harm the creature. Will restores power to the lift, and Nina switches it on before climbing aboard. Will joins her, and they fire at the advancing Reaper while Katie attempts to scale the tower. The monster leaps onto the cables, causing the chairs to sway dangerously. Katie miscalculates her jump but is caught mid-air by Will. Nina runs out of ammunition just as the Reaper jolts the cables again, sending all three crashing to the ground. They flee, barely crossing back into the 8,000-foot zone to safety. Exhausted, the group decides to rest in the ski lodge overnight. Over drinks, Nina theorizes that the Reapers, who decimated 95% of humanity without feeding or resting, may have been sent with the specific purpose of exterminating humans. As the others sleep, Will reflects on his last conversation with his wife, who believed in Nina's potential to find a way to defeat the Reapers. The next day, the group finally arrives at the mine where Will once worked. Will explains that both entrances to the tunnel lie above 8,000 feet, but the lower levels dip below the safety threshold, which raises concerns. The tunnels aren't adequately sealed, meaning the creatures could still infiltrate, and Nina's compass won't function underground. Despite these risks, having come this far, Nina and Katie reluctantly follow Will. Donning construction helmets for light, the trio ventures into the tunnels, trudging through intense silence for hours. Their progress is halted when they discover the main passage is blocked by a cave-in. Will declares they'll have to descend to level 7, which will require them to traverse 1,000 yards beneath the safety line. After a brief scare caused by bats, the group descends the stairs and enters the new tunnel, moving as quickly as possible to avoid drawing attention. Suddenly, they hear a noise and hastily switch off their helmet lights, but it's too late, a Reaper is already upon them. The trio bolts, with Katie occasionally firing grenades in a desperate attempt to slow the beast. Abandoned machinery temporarily hinders the Reaper's pursuit, and Will opens fire, though it proves ineffective. Spotting a hole in the wall, they duck inside as Will blasts the rocks to widen the gap, creating space for all three to hide. The Reaper's glowing tail probes into the crevice, but Will throws a flare to distract it. The light reveals an escape route in the opposite wall. They hastily clear away rocks and crawl through the narrow passage. Will is the last to move, narrowly dodging the Reaper's tail before rejoining the others. As Katie emerges into another tunnel, a Reaper immediately ambushes her, stabbing her with its tail. Will tries to reach her, but he's too late and is forced to watch as the creature drags her away. Distraught, Nina and Will spot a ladder and climb frantically as the sounds of a pursuing Reaper grow louder. They reach the surface just in time, escaping to the safety of high altitude. Exhausted but determined, the pair presses on, briefly stopping to pet a goat they encounter along the way. As night falls, they find an abandoned house and break into rest. Inside, they discover boxes of macaroni and cheese, which they cook for dinner. Will shares that it's Hunter's favorite meal. Curious, he asks Nina about the lab's potential, and she explains her hope to find a chemical that could finally make bullets capable of harming the monsters. She theorizes that the Reaper's scales are electrically charged, meaning the right bullet might induce internal combustion. Will is skeptical, dismissing it as a far-fetched magic bullet theory. He bitterly reflects on how his wife died for such an uncertain hypothesis. The next day, they take a truck from the house and drive across the line as quickly as possible, passing through a town overrun by wildlife. Eventually, they reach the hospital and begin searching for filters, spurred on by eerie noises despite the compass showing no warnings. On the top floor, they find the filters, but their relief is short-lived. A Reaper smashes through the wall, forcing them to flee. They dodge enormous claws, stumble over debris, and struggle with furniture in their path. At one point, the creature's tail ensnares Will, but Nina grabs a fire axe and strikes until the monster releases him. Thinking quickly, she opens a gas canister, filling the corridor with fog to obscure their movements. Inspired, Will waits for the Reaper to approach and fires at oxygen tanks, triggering a massive explosion that sends the creature hurtling through a window. Though the beast appears motionless, they cannot be sure it's dead. With time running out, Will wants to return to Hunter, but Nina persuades him to accompany her to the lab to complete her work. Driving off, they fail to notice the Reaper stir back to life. Upon reaching the lab, Nina sets to work mixing chemicals while Will stands guard. On one desk, he finds a photo of Nina's family, a past she has never mentioned. Tearfully, Nina explains that she was at work the day the world ended, unable to be with her family. She feels especially guilty for missing her son's football match, which she chose to skip. Overwhelmed, Nina admits she blames herself for Will's wife's death, but Will reassures her that no one is at fault. When Nina finally tests her bullet, it fails again. Devastated, she insists Will return to his son, vowing to keep experimenting until she succeeds or the Reapers claim her. Will departs, but Nina remains consumed by her work, oblivious to her compass reacting to an approaching threat. A noise breaks her focus, yet she realizes there's one chemical combination she hasn't tried. Frantically, she prepares it as her last hope. Meanwhile, Will's truck suffers a punctured tire and crashes. Dazed, he awakens to the sound of a Reaper closing in. He escapes through the broken window, running uphill despite his injuries. Just as he nears the safe line, a second Reaper appears, cutting off his path. In despair, Will opens fire to no effect, bracing for the end. Suddenly, Nina arrives and fires her newly crafted bullets. A strange explosion of smoke and electricity confirms her theory. She swiftly takes down both Reapers, who attempt to flee but are killed in seconds. Examining the corpses, Nina discovers mechanical parts, revealing the creatures to be robotic. When Will questions who sent them, Nina theorizes they were created by aliens. Back at the refuge, Will reunites with Hunter as Nina raises a pirate flag to signal her breakthrough. Survivors gather to produce the special bullets, and Will broadcasts a message of hope over the radio. Nina continues studying the Reaper's remains, determined to learn more. Armed and resolute, the survivors reclaim the forest, hunting the monsters. One evening, Will and Nina use a telescope to gaze at the stars, spotting 3 mysterious lights drawing closer to Earth. Make sure to subscribe and hit the notification button so that you don't miss any of our video updates.